to being able to sort of sell it as a domain or host it as a domain for people outside of Tuvalu?
Yeah. So .tv is Tuvalu's country code top-level domain name. And it generates revenue for us every year. We've been receiving it's around 5 million US a year from .tv under the previous contract that we had with VeriSign. .tv is a repurposed domain name. That means that it's not tied to Tuvalu. It can be used by anyone anywhere in the world that's interested in television or entertainment or live streaming, and they want to use .tv as a web address. They can use it. If you look at New Zealand, for example, you have .nz, and usually .nz is for people living in New Zealand or companies that are based in New Zealand. The difference with .tv is that we've repurposed to I guess to get more revenue out of it. But we've just signed a new contract with a new company, and the business model under that, we're hoping to increase our revenue, but to also have greater governance control, policy control over our asset that we did not have in the past. And the idea is that Tuvalu participates in the industry as well, and to grow our capacity to be able to host it locally, maybe in the next 5 or so years. And so this is one of the things that I was talking about, looking at ways we can take ownership of our own resources and generate greater revenue so that we are more independent.
You talked about having greater sort of regulation of it. What sort of things do you want to make sure are not happening on .tv? Or what are the risks there around letting anyone use .tv?
Well, I think the industry is already regulated quite well by ICANN, which is the governing body that assigns domain names to countries. But it's important that we maintain the reputation. I think we're thankful as well to VeriSign for maintaining a very high standard on the use of .tv, and we want to continue that into the future. But I think what we want to do with the domain name now is for us to participate, to have greater control in, for example, setting the price of a domain name. So those are the kind of things we want to grow our local capacity to be able to manage .tv ourselves. And so that's the new business model that we've adopted with the new company that have signed up to manage the domain name.
I've been watching with interest. I mean, you are blessed with, it's .tv is much more interesting than .nz. Now, I've got another regular question. You made a huge impact at COP last year, but many average Americans don't get the peril that Tuvalu is in. How can you win the hearts and minds of them?
Yeah, I've traveled to some of the bigger countries, and I can understand why it's difficult for people sitting in cities to really understand and appreciate the impacts of climate change. And it's one of the reasons why we're also looking at creative ways of packaging our message to the world. And we hit the bullseye with the COP26 speech that we did last year. It gained a lot of attention around the world. And I think that's the approach that we need to take. Because I feel that we shouldn't only just be focusing on the leaders that attend these meetings. I understand they make the decisions at the end of the day, but there's greater power when people, the public, are fully informed of these issues. And it is the public that will put pressure on their leaders. And in fact, they're the ones that elect their leaders. So I think that the message has to go far and wide so that people have a greater appreciation for the challenges that we are facing, because climate change is not just an issue for Tuvalu and countries like Tuvalu, but it is something that is affecting the world. It takes many forms in different places. I mean, we're seeing flooding, bushfires, things that are happening in different parts of the world. It's because of climate change. But but I think Tuvalu is at the forefront of it, and I feel that we also have a moral responsibility as people at the front line to forewarn the world that this is something that is coming upon all of us, and that's why we also have this catch line that we usually use, that if you save Tuvalu, you're saving the world. And the idea is that we need to do things now, because by saving Tuvalu, then you're in fact securing the global community.
Now, it's sort of off topic, but how did you guys come up with that video address last year? Was it your idea?
Yes, it was my idea. I initially pulled out of COP26. I did not want to go through all the quarantine that we had to face coming back into the country, and all the COVID restrictions in getting to the meeting. So I didn't attend for those reasons, but I still received an invitation to speak at one of the side events on climate mobility, and so I thought, well, what better way to demonstrate the impacts of climate change than to actually stand in the water. I wasn't too sure how that was going to go. I thought, well, let's record it, and if I think it's a bit too, I don't know, corny, we can just scrap it. But it turned out quite well, and it had the impact that it had. So, yeah.
And I've got another question. So obviously people are really engaged. What can citizens of other nations do to support Tuvalu and the Pacific as a region?
Well, as I said earlier, I think putting pressure on your leaders, policymakers, to take stronger climate action. I think if you look at the new administration in Australia, for example, I mean, we're quite happy with the positive steps that they've taken as well since they came into office. I think they've been in office for about now 5 or 6 months or so. But we're seeing positive steps that have been taken, and I think they're more sympathetic to the plight of the Pacific. And so I think it's important that people need to put pressure on their leaders.
So we've got about 10 minutes to go. So I'm just going to move on to some of those geopolitical tensions in the Pacific. Tuvalu remains one of the few countries in the world that recognizes Taiwan still. Why is that? Like, why do you have that position? Is it a possibility that it's going to change? And how does it make it? How do you feel when you're sitting in like the Pacific Island Forum when a majority of those are like recognize China and not Taiwan?
Taiwan was one of our very first diplomatic partners. I think it was in 1979 that we established ties with Taiwan. That was just about 1 year after our independence. And Taiwan has been a very strong partner with support over the years to Tuvalu. And so, I mean, in Tuvalu, we also respect decisions made by our forefathers. Under culture, we value loyalty, trust, genuine relationships, and so I think if you were to ask the ordinary Tuvaluan on the street, they will tell you that they respect and they certainly support this relationship with Taiwan, regardless of the challenges that we're facing, the pressure from outside. And we recognize that we are the minority in the Pacific, but we don't have any issues with that. Although we continue to face pressure from outside to change.
Any sort of thought about changing, and what sort of pressure are you feeling from outside to change?
Well, like I said, we're in the minority. I think in the Pacific, there are only 4 countries left that recognizes Taiwan. I think I had an experience earlier this year. I'm not too sure if you've heard about it. I withdrew from the Oceans Conference in Lisbon. The reason I pulled out of the meeting was because China had opposed the Taiwanese delegates on our delegation list, and they threatened to challenge the whole delegation if we did not comply. So I thought that was bully tactics from China, and we took a step to withdraw. I took the steps to withdraw from that to draw attention to the actions by China, because we feel that we're a sovereign state, and China and other countries need to respect that. Because on our delegation it was not just Taiwanese, we had an American, a Portuguese on the delegation list, and they were not challenged, but the Taiwanese were challenged. And so we do what we can to support our friends in Taiwan.
So they were on the delegation list because they were helping you, or they're part of your team who works on oceans, or
Yep.
They were on your list because Taiwan wasn't allowed to go otherwise?
No, they support us, they help us. We have technical people working in Tuvalu as well. And our hope is that we can take our technical people to support us in meetings like the Oceans Conference.
How important are those forums for you, the sort of bigger, broader being at the Oceans Conference and having your voice heard?
Well, it's critical that we're participating in these forums, because these are the forums where decisions are made, and the Pacific needs to be there. They need their voice to be heard, because we want to influence outcomes of decisions at that level, because they do affect the Pacific. I mean, we're big ocean states, and it's important for us to be right in the at that level, discussing issues that are affecting us.
And there's been a lot of concern from New Zealand, Australia, the US in the last sort of 6 months about China's growing presence in the region. As a country that's actually in the region, how do you feel about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that's one of the challenges that we have in the Pacific, because as part of the Pacific Island Forum, we have the membership are developing states, but we have 2 countries that are developed, Australia and New Zealand, and so often there can be at times differences in our interests, and that poses a challenge for us. We also have members in the forum that are still colonies of powers outside of the region, which also introduces another complexity to discussions and reaching agreement, consensus in the Pacific. But our view is that we do respect countries. That countries are sovereign. They have every right to make decisions that affect themselves. But we do encourage countries to also think about the well-being of the region as a whole, because you can you take action on that may benefit your country, but it may also introduce risks for the region. We had a World War II that affected the Pacific, wars that were fought in the Solomon Islands, in Kiribati, in Tuvalu, and so we it wasn't long ago that we had that experience. In fact, we hear stories from our grandparents that discussed how the experience that they had during the war. And the last thing we want is for that to happen again in the Pacific. And so I think we were always talking to our friends in the Pacific to be mindful of that, because these are real issues that can affect us and the future generations.
I imagine there are still scars of World War II in Tuvalu that you can sort of see, munition pits or that sort of thing. So it probably is very front of mind. Now, another viewer has asked, how do you keep pressure up against China's bullying? I presume that's in reference to what happened at the Oceans Conference. And do you plan any engagement with China?
We're not looking to do anything to China. In fact, we try to avoid them as much as possible. But when we are confronted by them, we're not afraid to speak our minds and to make a stand. But having said that, I think if we're truly serious about world peace, and we're really serious about addressing climate change, then there really is no good guys and bad guys in how things are painted at the moment. We need China on board. We need the US on board to address issues that are affecting the world at large. And so that's something that we're also mindful of when we end up, approaching the geopolitics in the region, is that we want China to be on board as well, to address many of the issues that we're facing globally.
And that brings us to the next question, which I'm hoping is not going to be the last question, because I think it might make me feel a bit sad for the rest of the day. Do you think there is still time to turn back climate change enough that we can save Tuvalu?
Well, we're listening to what the scientists are saying. The window is closing quite quickly, so I'm assuming that means that there is still a chance if countries really take strong climate action and cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's something that we, I guess, hopeful on one hand, but then on the other hand, we're also being realistic and being practical and taking steps now to secure our future, rather than wait around for the world to get its act together and address this issue. We're preparing for a worst case scenario.
The Pacific has actually got a lot of focus on it at the moment. The Deputy Secretary of State was sort of, when she was in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago, spoke about the fact that what happens in the Pacific is going to decide the future of the world. And I mean, I think that happens on many fronts. It's climate change, it's geopolitical tensions, it's the health of our ocean. How does it feel to be in that spotlight? It's, often I think the Pacific has been forgotten, and all of a sudden you've got the spotlight on in the world. How does it feel, and how can you use that?
Yeah, I think climate change has kind of really put us on the map as well. So we have to use that platform wisely to share our story and to share our message to the world. And I feel that we in the Pacific, we also have a moral responsibility in how we're stewarding our oceans. Is one of the things that helps us reduce the impacts of climate change. Our tuna resource supports economies in Japan, in Asia, the US fleet that is fishing in our waters. So if we manage these things well, and we're doing our part to conserve our resources and the oceans, then the whole world benefits. And so we feel that there is a moral responsibility on the Pacific to do that. But I also feel that there is a disproportionate burden on us to be doing this on behalf of the world. And the world needs to recognize that, and they need to support the Pacific, because it's ultimately it's in their interest to do so as well. And so I think as a leader in Tuvalu in the Pacific at the moment, we have to be wise in how we approach these issues moving forward.
Well, we've just hit the sort of 8:45. So I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating, and I can only wish you luck. So good luck, and we'll be watching and doing our own bit, hopefully, to reduce the impact of climate change for Tuvalu. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you.